Welcome to the show, Dr. Irene Lyon. I'm so excited to have this amazing conversation with you today.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here, and I'm not a doctor.
Oh, sorry. I don't know where I got that from. I feel like I hold you in my head in this way.
Well,
But
true story. I probably could have gone to medical school twice already if I put in the time of being in, right, learning.
yeah,
My
absolutely.
master's degree was when I did my master's in research, the examiners, because when you write a thesis, it has to get examined. They said that it was PhD status, but I didn't have a second intervention study in my research, so it wouldn't be counted as a PhD.
Oh man,
So
that's so.
sometimes, Danielle, I think, you know what? I have a PhD. It's just in another universe somewhere else. So thank you.
Well, I want to learn more about your story and what sort of brought you to doing the work that you do today.
Where do you want me to start? Because there's
Anywhere.
many avenues.
Well, I do want to talk about the nervous system
Hmm.
and especially how that relates to our metabolic health because that's really important to
Yeah.
people listening to the show. So,
Yeah.
any little
Okay.
nuggets that you can,
Perfect.
yeah,
I'll
share
do
with
that.
us.
So I'll do a quick kind of credential thing because it is important. So I have a master's degree in biomedical science and exercise health science. I also have a bachelor's in exercise science. So my 20s, right out of high school, was all about science, physiology, all that stuff, rehab, like physical rehab. And you had mentioned before we started recording that you used to be a speech pathologist, so you understand that world
Hmm.
of technicality. And I really loved it. Worked in fitness for, gosh, from like 1997 to 2008. So a solid chunk of time. In that time, I had some pretty serious injuries from skiing. I was an athlete and crazy stupid doing things and adrenaline junkie. Had some injuries that were not getting better from normal conventional therapeutics like what I was trained in. And so that led me to a mind body methodology that we probably won't talk about much today because it's less about metabolic health in the nervous system. But I got into something called the Feldenkrais method. And Feldenkrais was developed by a man by the name of Moshé Feldenkrais. Most people don't know this work because it's been hard to get onto the scene, but it completely changed my physical body. It is what allowed me to recover from an ACL tear and a patella fracture pretty much at the same time. Yeah. And that was like eye opening because I had never in my almost 10 years of university been taught about neuroplasticity. I had never been taught about the mind body connection and how to relearn movement from a developmental neurological perspective. So that really blew open my mind to this whole other world, and I loved it, fell in love with it, became a practitioner of this work, was still working in fitness, doing workshops, working in high performance sport. But then what happened back in 2008 is I was seeing clients in my private practice doing Feldenkrais. There's a hands on component, teaching classes. There was like a subset of people, quite large, that would get a little bit better and then they would like bounce back to their right. And I'm sure in your work you see this too, right? It's like, okay, there's improvement, but then it goes away unless you're constantly doing upkeep. And so I started asking questions, started poking around with my more elder colleagues. And one person led me to the work of Peter Levine, and he is the founder of Somatic Experiencing. I would say that when I found this work back in '08, it was very unknown. It is way more known now, I think, just because of time. And we're starting to see that unhealed trauma and stored up trauma and what we would call dysregulation of the nervous system inhibits our ability to heal, repair, and be metabolically well, and all sorts of other things. So I got into that work, fell in love with it, and I kind of didn't look back. I kept studying that work at the high levels, studying with other high level trainers who branched off from his work to learn more about early trauma developmental trauma, which is actually really tied in with this metabolic piece. And the rest is kind of history. I went into private practice, found myself doing less and less Feldenkrais work and more somatic trauma healing work, because people were just not regulated. Like, it wasn't enough to get them into better range of motion. It was good. You know, it provided them with a bit more openness, a bit more flow, but then they would go back home, they'd go back into their lives. They didn't know that this unconscious somatic trauma was in their bodies, and it would just snap them back like an elastic band, is kind of how I see it. So was in private practice, realized at that point, Danny, that it wasn't enough to just see someone 1 hour a week. It was nice. Not many people could afford that for multiple years on end, you know, and I thought to myself, people need to learn about their nervous system. They need to learn about the detail of the various systems, which we can get into. It's not enough to just know rest, digest, and fight, flight. Like, there's way more to it. And they also have to know how it impacts organs, cardiovascular, cardiorespiratory, thinking, engagement, limiting beliefs, burnout, perfectionism, resistance, all these things. And so one thing led to another, and I created two very now world-known online courses that teach people how to, as I say, become their own medicine. So that is what I do now. It's interesting. You caught me on a week where I'm finally in a place where I can start looking at more possibility to do more teaching in person, train other people. But really the last 10 years have been focused on developing this, we could say, curriculum so that general people can learn what I learned in my 15 plus years of neuroplasticity nervous system training.
That's amazing. And I feel like I missed the launch, and I hope I can still get in, because I feel like I need this work, that it's really already just the little bits that I'm sort of gleaning from what we're going to be talking about today is something that's really affecting me as a very overworked, perfectionistically leaning entrepreneur. So I guess is the best place to start out talking about what is an unhealthy or dysregulated nervous system and the comparison, like what is a healthy one versus unhealthy?
That's a great place to start. So what I'll do, if this is cool with you, is do like a little mini anatomy lesson.
Do it.
Yeah? Okay.
Yeah.
So obviously we have a body and there's organs and tissues and all those things, but there's these nervous systems, and we have more than one. So most people think of their nervous system as their brain and their spinal cord. That's the central nervous system. And that's just because it's in the center, right? Brain, spinal cord. But then coming out of the brain and out of the spinal cord are lots of nerves. If you've ever seen an anatomical drawing, or you went to that exhibit Body Worlds, they'd have these nerves. It's crazy, right?
Tons.
And they're like thick, but then they're also thin. And they're like tree branch, like roots of trees, right? And so the peripheral nervous system just means everything that comes out of the central, and that's where the autonomic nervous system lies. So the autonomic nervous system is responsible for a lot. It's responsible for our heart, our digestion, our hormone release, sleep-wake, shivering, temperature regulation, everything that happens in our bodies that we don't have to think about, hence automatic, it does it. That is also responsible for our survival. So most people know fight, flight, and the common example, which isn't always conducive to us living in Western civilization, is you see a bear's chasing you, saber-toothed tiger, and you're going to run, go into fight, flight. That is the sympathetic nervous system, which is part of the autonomic nervous system, which is part of the peripheral nervous system. And so the sympathetic is in charge of ensuring we can flee, fight, but it also is like I have more sympathetic energy right now because I'm upright, I'm talking to you, and I'm moving my body. If I was lounging out on the couch, just chilling, even talking to you, but in a more subdued way, I'd be less in sympathetic activity because I wouldn't need to. And if I'm like literally on a lounge chair, my muscles aren't having to be used. So that's the sympathetic, fight, flight. But then we have another branch of the autonomic nervous system called the parasympathetic, which I'm sure you've heard about and probably a lot of people have heard. Often that gets dubbed the rest digest. Now that's half true. The parasympathetic nervous system is responsible for slowing us down. Now that slowdown could be, I'm chilling out on the couch, having a chat with you, drinking a cup of tea. We're more in this kind of chill out way. We're also in that situation maybe socially engaging, right? As I'm talking to you, you're nodding your head, which means you're understanding me. We're engaging. You just smiled a little bit. I might smile back. Your teeth, your smile. So that's like social. That's mammalian. So it's not just us, but that's why we like our furry friends, dogs and cats, and all that kind of stuff. That is also part of our parasympathetic nervous system. That is we call it our ventral vagal. So it's a portion of our vagus nerve. Everybody's talking about the vagus nerve. Everyone's talking about it in a misinformed way. So one portion of the vagus nerve is this mammalian social engagement thing. So we have the parasympathetic slows us down. One portion allows us to rest and digest. So I like to think of it as gears of a car, like a manual stick shift. You've got this engine that's the parasympathetic. When you're truly resting and digesting, you're in a gear that's called the low tone of the vagus nerve. It's the low tone dorsal of the vagus nerve. And that allows our system, and this is very important for those with health problems. When you're in rest digest, the cells repair, the gut lining repairs, the immune system seeks out bad things and gets rid of things. It regenerates tissue. We need this, especially when we're sleeping. And anybody that doesn't get good sleep knows that they wake up feeling unrested, inflamed, and things aren't healing. So we need this portion of the parasympathetic, the rest digest, for good health. The other portion of the parasympathetic that I haven't mentioned yet is the freeze response. So a lot of people are talking about freeze. It's a survival response, but it is also within the parasympathetic. And it's also a portion of the vagus nerve. But rather than the vagus nerve being in a gear that rests and digests us, it's in a gear that shuts us down. It's like the e-brake, right? And it's a slowing down, but it's a harsh, fast halt. It is, I can't fight, I can't flee, I better stay here and freeze so that I numb out and I don't feel the saber-toothed tiger attacking me, for example, right? It puts those animals in the wild into a numbed out state so they don't feel the kill. It's adaptive. And so for humans, this can activate some people. It can also put them into shutdown as they hear this information because they go, well, I was in a fight flight situation and I couldn't fight. And I can say right now, then you went into freeze, or if you couldn't flee. Mm-hmm. There's no denying or debating that. The human system will go into freeze in that moment when they know they can't fight, they can't flee. And we'll get into this, the nuance, because we're not in the wild. We're in homes, family systems, and we have a higher brain that can override what's happening. And so back to autonomic nervous system, peripheral nervous system, it's responsible for all of our internal stuff, but it's also responsible for this fight, flight, freeze. Now, the thing that I haven't mentioned, the other cool part is the peripheral nervous system also allows us to move. So I've got a cup of water here. I have a tiny little cup of coffee. They weigh differently. And I am, without thinking about it, activating more muscle to carry this and less muscle to carry this. If this was boiling hot, I would sense it and feel, ooh, that's too hot, I can't pick it up. That's also the peripheral nervous system. It's the sensory motor nervous system that modulates that, and it's what allows us to know how much muscle to bring in. It allows us to move our bodies and all the things that we learn as babies to do. Part of healing the autonomic nervous system, and I'm kind of jumping ahead, but I want to put this in because it's important. A big part of healing the nervous system is working with the peripheral nervous system, with the sensory motor place, because it directly, or we could say indirectly, impacts the other portions of the peripheral nervous system, which are the ones I just talked about. The fight, flight, freeze, and the digestive, immune, all that. So, as a general kind of scope, our nervous system is many things, but when we're stuck in that fight, flight, freeze, which we'll get into, because that's kind of just human society right now as a generalization, all of the internal processes that we need our peripheral nervous system, our autonomic nervous system to upkeep, they're being shunted, if you will, to use a physiological term, as a metaphor, they're being shunted to fight, flight, freeze. And so the upkeep, the repair, the gut lining repair, the housekeeping that happens when we sleep, it's not happening. And then the other thing that occurs is it limits our sensory motor. This is why people who are stuck in survival are clumsy. They're rigid in their body tissue, or they're collapsed. They don't have the energetic to be active. It's not because they're lazy, it's because they're being co-opted by their freeze and collapse response with a lot of sympathetic under it. I hope I'm making sense.
You are. Would a person like this also be more prone to injury?
Yes, that was me.
That's me.
So
I'm asking because it's me.
I had my first injury when I was 5. I went over my handlebars as a little girl. I was a daredevil even when I was 5 years old. I grew up on skates, skis, biking, canoeing, hiking, chopping wood, like fully, in the outdoors.
Yeah.
And that injury kind of set me up to not understand my limits. And so then I went on to ski race and was really good at it, but I didn't have the little signal in my head to say, Irene, slow down, because I was living in what's called a functional freeze. And my sense is that's probably what you've been in, not needing to know your history, but that's what most successful, put together humans, not just women, are. They've denied their inner impulse, their feelings, and then they keep getting injured because they don't feel that spidey sense that says, slow down, put on the brakes, and then we get injured, and we get injured, and we get injured. So the good news is, since doing this work for myself, I haven't been injured since like 2001.
Wow, that's amazing.
I've had, muscle strains, but I haven't had a physical injury where I'm like on crutches or need a surgery, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So yes, to answer your question.
Amazing. So this is some stuff that I have recently been learning about, and I love the way you're laying it all out and giving us all these details. So I learned this as sort of like the pregnenolone steal, where our body is supposed to be prioritizing reproduction because that's how we know we're healthy, and we have this precursor hormone, pregnenolone, but when we're super stressed, it all gets, instead of being made into, progesterone and estrogen so we can have a healthy period or have a baby, that it turns into cortisol because the body will always prioritize survival over these secondary functions like digestion, like reproduction. And that's why also, if you look, and correct me anywhere if I'm wrong, when I've looked up, if you look up sympathetic versus parasympathetic and you get a diagram of the body, you'll see that, it shuts down saliva production. The sympathetic shuts down bile production and stomach acid and peristalsis. So all of these actions, and then it will also raise our glucose. So, but it will shut down so many of these secondary functions because the idea is that we're running from a saber-toothed tiger, but really we're opening an email or, in an argument with our spouse or politics or whatever, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think too, So you asked the question at the beginning, dysregulation versus regulation.
Yeah.
And so one can be in a soup of stress, but be regulated, and they won't go into fight flight long term. So this is the important thing, is fight flight survival. I think it's like we only want to be in that for like, and you're going to laugh at this, like 8 to 10 seconds.
Oh, wow.
Quick.
Yeah.
You know, there's probably some buffer in there, but it's quick. Let's say a minute, right? And as soon as that stress is gone, we need to come out of it. It comes back to that in the wild thing. If there was a real threat in the wild, it would be over quickly. It wouldn't sustain. And so what's occurred in the advent of modernity and industrialization and domestication of plants and animals and all the things that humans have done, which I like living in a house. I like running water. I like the fact that I can talk to you and you're on the other side of the continent. These things are, I think, quite good. However, I feel very strongly that because we're living in this non-natural, organic way, we need to understand our physiology so that we're not constantly running on these fight, flight, and freeze fuels, because all of the chronic, I'm being very general, but most of, if not all of the chronic conditions that we could list, when you really boil it down, and a lot of the research is showing this, it is a result of the sympathetic nervous system being stuck in fight and flight with the parasympathetic emergency brake freeze clamping down. And those running at the same time is what creates the syndromes that we are so familiar with. Chronic fatigue, autoimmune, fibromyalgia, all the pain conditions, circulation problems, metabolic problems, period, reproductive problems, right? And so when we look at all these sort of troubles that are lining up, whether it's fertility, whether it's hormones, whether it's just the ability to know how to feed ourselves, if you think about that, it doesn't make sense that we don't know when to eat and how much to eat and when to stop. That's highly maladaptive. If you were in the wild, you wouldn't go foraging if you weren't hungry. Well, you would, because you might store it, but you're not going to look for excess. It's just too much metabolic energy to keep hunting when you don't need any more, right? Unless you're, of course, storing it up for winter. So there's the specifics there. But the thing that's occurring is the dysregulation is driving these health problems. It's also driving brain problems, because the brain is still an end organ. It's part of that central nervous system that is being impacted by the excess cortisol. But then what occurs, and you would know this in your work, Danny, is people then crash. There's no more cortisol. It's flatlined. And that's because the system hasn't gotten the memo that there is no more saber-toothed tiger, when that tiger might have been a shitty family life or a surgery really young that put your little baby infant system into distress and you never came out of it. It could be the school system that stressed you out every single day of your life, which you hear adults say, I was sick. I had a tummy ache every single day going to school. I was that kid in elementary school, right? That's a lot of stress. And what I'm seeing is more and more humans are getting sick younger. It's when I was a kid, not many parents were chronically ill. And now I'm 47 right now. And so it's like, now it feels like every other person I meet has some form of chronic illness or condition. And that's not genetically feasible for us. Like, it's like we're going opposite to the way we should be. Yeah. And I do think it's because not only are we holding our stressors, but we know transgenerationally that we keep the stressors of our ancestors. And so each generation that exists and lives and comes out, they're like, they've got an extra load of weight on their back. And I think that's why we're lining up with, okay, we really have to work at this level. And unfortunately, all of the healthy eating, healthy eating is good. I'm not saying don't eat healthy and exercise, but I've been in this long enough that people will be like, I'm eating healthy, I'm exercising, I'm doing mindfulness, I have good relationships, and I'm a mess. What's going on? It's like, well, it's probably old signals that have been with you before you were even born.
Yeah. So
Boom.
I would love to talk about the trauma that comes in here.
Mm-hmm.
I did an NLP session, it's neuro-linguistic programming,
Yep.
if anyone's not familiar, and after a traumatic death of my cat, and I had to clear the emotion guilt. And it wasn't clearing when we were doing these practices in my lifetime. And I'm not going to go into the details, but
Sure.
I had to go back to this generational trauma, and if it's true, I don't, there's no way to prove that it's true, but after I went back, it was a couple of generations, I cleared the guilt from that, and my life is totally different. It
Yep.
feels so different in my
Yeah.
body. So that was one thing that I experienced with, you could hear that and be like, can that be true? But I mean, we are in the wombs of our maternal grandmothers. So
Yes.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's all that information,
course.
and we're vibration and energy. Like, it is so for the people out there who are thinking like, I'm a skeptic too, but it's
Oh no, it's true.
yeah.
I'm going to
so
be,
true.
I'm going to say right now, just because you can't study it and see it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And I hope that we're getting over that.
Yeah, that we have to be able to see it and understand
See
it
it.
to believe it. Yeah.
It's kind of like, and people will use the example, well, how do you explain what it feels like to fall in love?
Right.
Like it's chemistry, but it's different. Like, there's something very different. And it is, we know through the research that not epigenetics, well, that's real too, but transgenerational trauma occurs.
Yes.
The studies after 9/11, after the Holocaust, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of those after the last 3 years.
Yeah.
It's already starting to happen.
Yeah.
And so it's really important. And this is like, it doesn't even woo-woo to me, because it is quantum. And I know we have some similar quantum acquaintances in the world. Shout out to Carrie and Sarah. But if you believe and feel that something is true, then it probably is. And that doesn't mean that the other person has to believe it, because they have a totally different history and a different path. But what you just said about the guilt, that is accurate, right? I've lost pets and it sucks. And it's a pet. I hate to say that, but it's like, if it is over the top, devastating, there's probably something else attached to that. And it's not to, again, diminish that, but it's like, what's going on here? I was talking to another podcaster just yesterday about, she had a breakup. She was only with a man for a month, dating. And she was like, I think I'm going to kill myself. And she's like, wait. And she had the wherewithal to go, wait, I've only been with this person for a month. This isn't my 50-year-long husband. And I'm devastated to the point where this doesn't make sense. And she tracked her feelings and her sensations, and it matched her childhood of being abandoned and being alone. And it just triggered a physiological response. And this is what I think is important about the somatic nervous system work, not just working with brain chemicals and the mind and cognition. We have to feel. I'm sure when you did that work where you went back into the generations, you were in your body. You were tracking body sensations, heat, shivers, grief, gut-wrenching stuff, right? It all impacts in our body. And this is why people are really saying now the somatic work is so important. Yeah. But we also have to understand why it's important, because it's actually not enough to just track sensation. There's so much more going on.
Yeah, tell us.
How shall I start this? So let's just say, I'll use an example. Let's just say someone knows that they grew up and they were not allowed to express emotion, which is so many kiddos. Yeah.
Only happy ones.
And it usually isn't because the parents are trying to be malicious. They're just doing what they were taught, right? The children of the parents who were post-World War II, who were alive during that time, there was a lot of freeze. There had to be. There were real food shortages and all the things that were occurring. Nobody knew what was going to go on. So there was a stoicism brought out of those two world wars, and then, the Depression, and yes, there's still wars happening, but it's different these days, I feel. So let's just say you grew up in that ice cold, everything is perfect, leave it to Beaver family, and you feel pain because you broke your arm, or you feel sadness because your pet died, or you lost a best friend because they moved away, and you're never allowed to feel that intensity. What happens is you start to shut down to those feelings, to the sensations. But emotion is rooted in sensation, and sensation is rooted in the organs. You don't normally feel an emotion in your femur,
yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Can't say I have.
No, or your big toe, or your hair. It's in the gut. Mm-hmm. It's in the throat. Yeah. It's in the eyes. Mm-hmm. It's in where our glands are and where our organs are, our lungs, our genitals, our kidneys, it's all in the viscera. And so if you're shutting down feeling emotion, you're also shutting down feeling sensation, and you're shutting down feeling your organs. So when you stop feeling these things, you're also not in tune with your needs for those organs.
I feel very called out this whole conversation. No,
I'm sorry.
No. In a really good way. This is all stuff that I'm working on literally with a somatic therapist. So
beautiful.
I love hearing you say it because you're just organizing it in a way that's easy to understand. And I think so many people will be listening to this and identifying like, wait, I don't know that I'm very in tune with that. So one of the things how it manifests for me is that I don't feel very connected to how I feel. I have that tendency to bring everything up to my head, especially with how I've been socialized and just sort of my default, what I saw in my family and things. Mm-hmm. It's like someone might ask me a question, oh, is it okay if such and such? And I will feel a gut, almost like a gut wrench, something. I feel something, and I think about it. And I go, well, they did me this favor, I did this, so I will just think about it as opposed to listening to what's happening. So just the fact alone that I knew that there was an actual sensation, like I felt a sensation, was a huge win for me because typically I wouldn't have even known that was happening. And so now it's to this, I'm sort of trying to recognize that pattern. But one of the things where it shows up for me is that I'm not in tune with what's happening in my body. And it's not surprising that I feel like I have chronic gut issues that I'm like, oh, I had so many antibiotics as a kid. But I think it's until I do this work, I won't see that full release there. Because like you said, I'm just, ignoring these sensations.
Yeah, and it was adaptive, right? So that's the other thing is there's no... I can say this cognitively, there's no shame in that because that's what had to happen to survive in that family system, right? So that's a part of the healing is just acknowledging, not even blaming, just, oh, that's what occurred. Yeah. And so what I was mentioning, how somatic work isn't just about feeling the felt sense, which I see some people teach. I'm like, well, that's part of it, but what if you can't? Then are you just shit out of luck, right? And no, you go back. This is where I think the map that I drew out of the nervous systems and the peripheral nervous system is so important because let's just say like some of my really high level PTSD, chronic anxiety, can't leave the house people, right? This is very common. It's terrifying to feel in here. Yeah. It's even terrifying to consider touching their own bodies because the touch that they received when they were young was so volatile, cold, or violent. It doesn't have to be violent. It could be just like nobody's home. You get touched and the person isn't there, right? That attunement that babies need. If you never got that, it's going to feel creepy to actually bring your own hands to do some work like that. So one of the things I mentioned about the parasympathetic is the ability to socially engage. Even for some people, that's terrifying. So one of the ways we work with inching our way into the nervous system is not through trying to feel the sense or the organs or touch, but to actually engage with the environment. So we would call this orienting. It is about letting your system go into the outside world and see it in a way that is safer for one than not. So this is where it gets tricky. This is where you can't give a person a list of 10 things to do when they feel anxious, because some people will orient to the environment for the first time in their life because they've never considered it, and they feel more fear because the environment is where that saber-toothed tiger was, i.e. father, mother, school system, siblings, whatever, that were mean to them. And so it's like, okay, it's too much to look far away, but what would it be like to just look at your lap or feel the tiniest touch of your hands on the desk? Most people won't even know that there's that kinesthetic, tactile, sensory motor thing that I mentioned about the heaviness of the cups. Like, we'll just go through life robotically, not even noticing that there's warmth to that mug, or there's weight to that glass of water, or that your feet are planted on the floor. And so we're literally teaching someone, I like to say, the ABCs and 1, 2, 3s of reconnecting to maybe the environment, maybe the internal, or maybe a little bit of both. And so for me, in the work that I teach, somatic trauma work, it isn't what we see in the flashy Instagram reels where everyone's tapping and making sounds and pulling on their ears and all these things. It's like, I get what they're trying to do, but you can't biohack attunement to self. You can't take a newborn baby and biohack it into a fully regulated human being. I always make the joke, if you have a baby that's crying, you can't ask it to take a deep breath and hold and exhale really slowly. What you have to do is you have to hold them and attune to them in a way that's energetically safe, and then they feel that co-regulation is what it's called. And by that connection to the environment, i.e. maybe the mother, then they bring their nervous system down. Then they engage. The mother says, "You're fine." And the baby goes, "I am." They don't say that, but they feel it. So what's happened, Danny, is there's these people know that their nervous systems are dysregulated. They know that the vagus nerve is at play. They know that there's some sensory stuff at play. There's processing of the eyes, and they're trying to hack these things to shortcut regulation, but you can't shortcut regulation because you can't shortcut that as an infant. And so as adults, what I'm trying to teach is, how can we not go back, because you can't go back to being an infant. It's not even about reparenting. It's about relearning how to connect to body, inside, the environment, but also how we feel and see ourselves, how we connect with our movement. So it's a big undertaking, and it's not a quick fix. That's the thing I think that we've been taught, at least in the fitness world, like how many, 10 minutes for flat abs, right? Yeah. Like that kind of, that messaging is brutal, and it's still being written on magazines this day, and it doesn't work. We know that. So it's the same with the nervous system. I think because the nervous system creates a lot of chronic illness, there's this thought that we then treat the nervous system like you would an infection with an antibiotic. Let's just do 12 days of work and everything will be fine. It doesn't work that way with this. I hope I'm not going too much in a roundabout tangent here.
No, I love all the information you're sharing. So I think you were kind of talking about how we can't biohack our way, so there's a lot of misinformation. So can you give us any idea of, obviously not the whole picture, but maybe what people get wrong and sort of how you can, like you said, how to sort of come out of this, or some of the process that needs to be done?
So what I'll say will seem, it's going to be very theoretical, but I'll try to put example. Sure. And what I will say is it's very hard to convey this until you try it. Okay. But if I were to lay out on the table kind of, let's say, 4 main columns of things that we want to do, one of them is education. So already, a little bit of education got popped in today, specifically about the parasympathetic nervous system being much more complex. So that's important. And the reason why we need education and deeper education than that is, like I said a second ago, one person might try to orient to the world in an exercise that I might teach, and they actually feel it settling their system. Wonderful. That feels so good. Another person might have the exact same exercise lesson, I call them, and it sends their system into absolute anxiety and panic. So we need to teach you why that is. Because if we don't, what happens is the person thinks, well, either this exercise isn't doing anything, or I'm broken, I can't fix myself, I'm going to forget about it, right? And so you could have a person, the same person, have those two responses on different days. And it depends on their energy. It depends on what we would call their capacity. Someone with lower capacity actually might be fine looking around, but they're actually disconnected. I was talking to a student the other day who said, yeah, I'm working with this person, and when I ask them to just tune into their body, it's like, okay, yeah, I've done it. And he was like, wait, you didn't take any time. And it turned out that, yeah, this person was terrified to go into their body, and he thought he went into his body, but actually he just disconnected and said, okay. And you know when someone isn't really able to sync because they can't take the time to just be in it because it's too scary. So again, that's where, okay, that's not bad that happened, but it gives the practitioner, or it gives me as a teacher, okay, we now know that this person has such a low capacity to feel inside. So education is important. Understanding that your system, how shall I say this? It adapted to preserve your sanity. And one thing that is often quite revolutionary for folks who have been attacked, abused, sexually, physically, is they will beat themselves up for not fighting back, right? For not getting out of there, for not doing something. But like I said, their system involuntarily went into a freeze response. So if we take that scenario, and we know now, I'll just use that example, that person keeps getting into physical abuse situations, or they keep getting attacked. You need to work at that freeze level to break out of it. And you also have to work up so that they can feel the fight flight that never got to express. But this is the clincher. It isn't enough to say to someone who has no foundation, no understanding, and no basic capacity to stay in the here and now, okay, I need you to pretend to fight off your attacker. And they're like, what? You know, like it can't come in a way that is forced. It has to be like their real impulse to feel, oh my God, I want to just push, right? But to say to someone, just push, that's not going to connect to the body. So much of this healing is growing the capacity in the system to even just be with basic biology. And when we do that, and this is like over months and months, and some people years, which scares some people, but this is how it works. They'll be sitting there one night and they know they have more capacity. They can be in their body, they can be in their environment. And all of a sudden they have a tingling of heat. And then all of a sudden there's a memory of that attack. And all of a sudden they feel this, oh, this push or this get off of me or something. And the system naturally, organically brings up the old trauma. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's wild that it's just so stored in our body.
It is. Yeah, it is. And
it's hard
I
to
think
wrap your head around.
It is hard. And the thing that's so hard is because so many of us have been living in functional freeze, we don't have any roadmap to understand how this might come out. And so your question about why can't you biohack it, it's because the system is too smart. It is not going to let something out if it knows it can't handle that big bolus of energy.
Yeah.
Now, what
just like
often
your body won't lose weight if there's toxins stored and your gut's a mess and you're not eliminating, it's going to hold on to that. So
it's going to hold on to it.
Same body, same process, just different thing.
You got it. It's exactly the good analogy for sure. Yeah. And I think this is why the biohacking And this is why we've seen so many disaster stories with people going to, say, 10-day meditation sits, plant medicine ceremonies, even breath work. I get stories all the time of people who went in with good faith. Nobody's trying to harm anybody, but they have such small capacity in their physiology, in their sensation, and then they blow up their system either with a medicine or with just being quiet for a long time, or this big opening of the lungs and flow of oxygen when their system has been living in a shutdown. It's like you're trying to force something through something that isn't big enough for it, right? And so what occurs is they might then have this rush of memory and sensation and voices, and their gut and their immune system goes, "What are you doing? We have been nice and cozy, hanging out in this shutdown, storing up all these traumas, and now you're asking me to open up so fast. Well, we're just going to pop them all out." And this is where we'll hear people that will get flares or they will get sick after these things, and they'll be out for years. They won't be able to sleep for years. They'll get IBS after the ceremony, after the breath thing, or it could be any other chronic condition. And what's occurring is those nicely packed in fight, flight, freeze responses have been poofed open. And then again, that autonomic nervous system that's governing the good flow of, say, digestion and release of chemicals is in chaos. And you don't know if this is the thing, nobody knows if that's going to occur, because some people go into these things and they're okay. But then some people go in and it just breaks them open. And so this is where having not only education, but working on, I like to say, building foundations slowly over time. Just like if a child was learning how to be in the world, you're not going to take a newborn baby out and ask them to walk across the hall with plates in their hands. It's like, it just wouldn't happen. So why would you ask a human who's been shut down and functionally frozen since they were, say, 5, to all of a sudden be able to express anger and feel all these things? There needs to be this, we would call it titration, this titrated, slow laying of the foundation. But the cool thing is that once you have that foundation and you start to feel the tough things, when the tough things come through, you have got the skill and you've got the ability to be with these big tsunami waves of emotion and sensation and memory. When people say they have flashbacks, that's usually not a good thing. It's intense. But we want to actually, if there is a memory that's stored, we want to remember it so that we can integrate it and process it. But typically the therapeutics of, say, the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and even the early 2000s haven't addressed the level in which we have all been so shut down.
Yeah.
I hope that makes sense.
It does. It does. Is there a way to know at what age you started this functional freeze, or if there was an event? There's no way, right?
I mean, you can trace back your world and know, like, that's when my baby brother died, or that's when mom lost her job, or that's when there was a car accident and everybody pretended everything was fine, but someone was killed, or, and that energetic in the family will just infuse, let's say, the little ones. But even in utero, mom doesn't know how to connect to baby, growing little one inside, that is also going to start the functional freeze piece. If she is in constant threat and little one is getting a dose of these cortisol hits often, all the time, and she's afraid, that little one starts to retract and try to literally get away from her in utero. Yes. And because, there's chemicals going in, and there's this. So when you work with people who have had in utero trauma, there will often be this pulling back, like trying to get away. And one thought is that a lot of premature infants, again, this is just speculation, but my husband was one of these, like, I need to get out of here. Like, this is too stressful to be in this soup of stress. And so it can start there. And then if you get brought into a family system where, yeah, like people really are taking care of you, but they're like nobody's home. You need that connection, that expression, that warm touch. And so functional freeze, it can start really young. But from what I've seen, it's usually not just one event. It's just this layering of life events.
Yeah.
And not having really the vernacular, the language in our space to talk about it.
Yeah.
You know, it's we could say it's really sad, and it's also really good that we know this, because I'm watching, of course, my students come out of functional freeze slowly, and my more advanced students, I see them changing each month. It's like, you have so much more energy, you have so much more vitality. One student the other day said, I can be in the cold now. I never used to be. I could not stay warm, and that is a sign of dysregulation. And we know that in, metabolic worlds, when someone is always cold, we might say, oh, it's a thyroid condition. It's like, well, yeah, that might be true, but what's driving that? And usually it's excess cortisol. But why is the excess cortisol there? It's because we still think we're being chased by the saber-toothed tiger, and we're frozen.
Wow. Yeah, I was going to ask, what are some, like, once you are doing the healing, what are some results of this? I know you have to go, so this will be the last question. No,
we're okay for a few minutes. Okay. The results are depending on the person. Yeah. That's the thing. Full regulation means our digestion is working smoothly, our immune system and all of that is working in conjunction with our hormones. We have energy to get our heart rate up so we can move, we can exercise. When we chill, we really come down. We can be in relationship. We think clearly. There's no memory loss. That's
something that I definitely experience.
Cortisol.
I have a hard time. Like, I feel like I don't remember stuff well. I mean, I remember nutrition facts beautifully.
Of course.
I remember about my clients and certain standout memories, but a lot of stuff, like I also read, even just posts online that said, if you don't have a lot of childhood memories, and I have a lot from photos, but not actual memories.
Visceral.
Yeah.
And that's what occurs is when we haven't had that richness and that goodness, we are essentially, it's like we're grayed out, like the technicolor isn't there. It's like black and white. And so, our brain function improves, our ability to think, but also to create, because our brains are creative in the way that they've been built through, we don't even know where they came from really yet. And so it's like, they're so powerful. But the other thing is, when we have regulation, Danny, we know what is safe and not safe. So when we have dysregulation, it's running our show. Good thing too, I see my students, they start to know their actual cravings as accurate, as opposed to history says when I have a stressor, this is what I do. That's a behavior, right? And so our behaviors start to become less routinized, and we become more organic and more in the moment. And so how a person's system shifts as they gain more of this somatic capacity and regulation is really indicative to where they're at. For some people, let's just say they know they have bowel problems. It might be that takes a bit to change. And what they notice is that they're more interested in being around people. Or they're more interested in going outside because they're actually orienting to the world around them and they're seeing it coming in. And so I think this is where it's difficult, because it's like there's no one specific result. But what occurs is the shifts happen slowly in different ways. It isn't just one day, everything here is going to be perfect. And then next week, everything there is going to be perfect. Because that autonomic nervous system is touching all these systems, as you said at the very beginning, right, with the pregnenolone and having enough energy to maintain all the things and make a baby for females, it's kind of that way. It's like it will take care of what needs to be taken care of first, And sometimes the thing that we want to have taken care of is the last thing to change.
This is exactly the same as how I see my clients when they heal their metabolism and their blood sugar. It's the same thing. It doesn't look the same for everyone. For some people, they get more energy. Some people, they sleep better. Some people, they have less cravings. But oftentimes, it's like the one thing I want, it's like everything else got better, but I haven't lost weight yet. Or everything else got better, but I'm struggling with my sleep. So it's, it's that one thing. And then, I know exactly what you're talking about, how everyone is going to have a different presentation of it, also a different presentation of blood sugar issues. It's not like you will have 3 twitches in your left eye. It's not, I wish it were that cut and dry.
It's not that cut and dry.
Way easier.
Well, well, the other thing that I didn't mention, there's 2 things that are important. We also, and this is kind of a macro thing for people to consider, is to take my saber-toothed tiger example. Like, the tigers in the world, whether they're on the African continent, I don't know where the tigers are, but wherever they are, the big cats, right?
Yeah.
They will take care of their baby kittens the same, whether in China, here in Canada with the mountain lions, or in Africa. We know that. There's no differing parenting books for the cats in the wild. It's intuitive, right? We know that. It's just, until you really think about it, it's like, oh, that's right. All the animals in the wild don't go to parenting seminars. They know exactly what to do. And they're mammals, and it's baked into their DNA. So we as mammalians have that in our DNA as well. But because of culture and condition, and again, this human brain that has been inserted into us, we have this little kind of glitch that makes it such that even siblings in the same family with the same parents might be raised differently because of circumstance and all the things, And so with that, we have all these humans that are very, very unique. They're unique and different. And that's why, you can't say on week 7, you're going to get a twitch in your eye, you're going to cry, and you're going to be fine. It doesn't work that way. And I think that's the part that we need to understand when we heal. The other thing I didn't mention was the metabolic health, but I've already kind of covered it. When you are stuck in functional freeze, when there's fight and flight and freeze, which is most of us in the Western world to some degree, the vessel is not humming at the right speed, and it doesn't know how to slow down, and it doesn't know how to speed up when it should. And the other thing is when you're in this shutdown, because there are some people that live in shutdown who are over-exercisers. That's how they feel, right? They're addicted to sport and adrenaline and exercise because it gets them out of their shutdown, right? So that's one case, but those who are more chronically ill and don't have the energy, when they start to get these fight, flight, and freeze mechanisms a little less on, they will have more energy to be a bit more active. And then that just contributes to the overall metabolic health because you're building more muscle, you're burning energy, you're not stagnated. So if you think about metabolic health in relationship to nervous system health, they go together, but the stagnation is what we're trying to shift. And that's a term, in Eastern medicine with Chinese medicine. It's all about moving, getting the flow, getting the qi going. Yeah. And it's the same with this. It's just different language.
Yeah, it is. And I love that there was an analogy that like still water breeds disease. So if there's stillness in the body, there will be disease.
Yeah.
I work with a huge population of people who have hypoglycemia and reactive hypoglycemia, and their blood sugar is crashing all the time. Oftentimes they present with really low cortisol or this like adrenal burnout type thing. And I was actually talking to someone yesterday, and she was saying her blood sugar is crashing every hour, and she has 2 kiddos and ages 2 and 3. I mean, the amount of stress that she's under and the trauma from the blood sugar crashing. I mean, we were crying together. This was just a discovery call, and I'm like crying with her because just I can't imagine the amount of daily traumas that she is experiencing and what that might feel like in her body. And I know that everything that you just that you talked about today is also at the root of what is happening. And I do not think that she will be able to fully heal until both things are really addressed. And that's why I'm so thankful for all the information you're sharing. And you'll have to tell us, where people can find you and work with you, because, I would definitely be interested in training as one of these practitioners because my people need this work. I need this work, of course. It's usually, I do something first and then teach it to my other people, right? Because I need it. But, people need this work, and it's so important. So thank you so much for sharing everything you did with us today. And please tell us where we can find you, and I'll link everything in the show notes.
It's just my name is my site, so IreneLyon.com, Lyon. And there is everything from a more, outlined credentials to my YouTube channel to the connections to social. The real place to start is if one wants to begin practice is my I call it my self-study course. It's called the 21-Day Nervous System Tune-Up course. That is kind of a beginning. It's not all of it. It's not everything, but it is a way for someone to start. Our longer curriculum, which is 12 weeks, called Smart Body, Smart Mind, we run that and open up registration usually once, sometimes twice a year. And that has the content that is within the 21 days, but it also gets into working with the organs, working with the gut, the kidneys, the adrenals, the brainstem, the layers of the body, like the skin, the muscle, the bone. We work with healthy aggression and anger and toxic shame. And it's a very comprehensive program. And I can confidently say it's probably the gold standard for somatic trauma healing in that online way. Again, I went and did that because it was just not enough to get all this information to my clients 1 hour a week. It would take years. And so the curriculum really teaches a person about their physiology from theory, but then it's this active, engaged practice of learning how to get back into the body, get into what we would call the interoception, get into the environment, and then mix them together, which is what a healthy, regulated system does. I will say too, we've had at least 2 people I know of who both have type 1 diabetes. One woman said say I would be dead if it wasn't for this. And another has found that the action of engaging with her parasympathetic nervous system through social engagement has made it such that her sugar doesn't spike when she exercises. And she just watches the glucose monitor when she engages in these active attuning exercises, which she didn't get growing up. And so that just shows one example of how we're more than just blood sugar, and we're more than just a nervous system. We need to bring it all together the way we really would want to raise a healthy human from in utero to teenage year to reproductive years, right? Yeah. So anyway, that's where people can find me. Yeah. All of it is there.
Well, I'm definitely your ideal client, so I'm eating this up and really listening, and I really appreciate just the thoughtfulness also behind how you put all these things together, and I can't wait to take your course, and I can't wait to learn more. So thank you so much for being here, and
you're welcome.
I hope you have a great rest of your day.
I will. You too.
Bye-bye.